Alright, fam, let's talk about Heart of Darkness, Chapter 1. This story kicks off with a vibe so heavy, you could cut it with a knife, and by knife, I mean a rusty machete you found while wandering through the jungle in survival mode. It's about power, greed, and what happens when people lose themselves chasing something shiny, like gold or clout. Oh, and it's all narrated by a dude named Marlow, who's about to take us on a wild ride down the Congo River, into the metaphorical, and literal, Heart of Darkness. Picture this, the story starts with a squad of 5 dudes chilling on a boat called the Nelly, anchored on the Thames River. The sun's setting, the sky's looking like a perfect Instagram filter, and everything's got this calm before the storm energy. Among the squad is Marlow, our main guy, who's got some serious storytelling energy. You know that one friend who always has a deep, wild story that starts off chill but ends with your jaw on the floor? That's Marlow. The dude's seen some stuff, and he's about to spill. So, Marlow starts talking about how, back in the day, the Romans rolled up to Britain and colonized it, and how it was probably a grim, hardcore experience. He's like, yeah, imagine showing up in some foreign land, clueless, and then trying to take over while also dealing with the weather, the locals, and your own questionable life choices. The vibe is basically, colonization isn't glamorous, it's gritty and dark. This sets the tone for what's coming, because, spoiler alert, the rest of the story is about how colonization is way messier and uglier than anyone likes to admit. Then, Marlow starts talking about his own life and how he ended up on the sketchy trip to Africa. It all starts because he's got this obsession with maps. Seriously, the guy's geeking out over maps like they're the latest Legend of Zelda game. He's especially fascinated by this one big, blank space in the middle of Africa, which he calls the Heart of Darkness. He's like, what's in there? Adventure? Treasure? Answers to life's big questions? Classic curiosity over common sense move. Eventually, Marlow lands a gig as the captain of a steamboat for this mysterious trading company that's all about ivory. You know ivory, it's the hot commodity of the time, and everyone's obsessed with it. It's like the Bitcoin of the colonial era, but way worse, because people are literally destroying ecosystems and cultures to get it. Anyway, Marlow doesn't even care about the ivory, he just wants to see what's up with that mysterious blank space on the map. He's like, I'm built different. I'm not here for clout or cash. I just want the experience. So, Marlow heads to the company's headquarters, which is super fancy but also super sketchy. He gets major bad vibes from the start, especially when he meets this group of dudes who are basically the colonization equivalent of office drones. They're all wearing suits, looking bored, and pretending they're not part of something super shady. One guy interviews Marlow, and it's painfully awkward. The dude's asking all these weird questions, like he's trying to figure out if Marlow's gonna freak out in the jungle or go full-on conquistador. Marlow's like, I just want to steer boats. Next, he has to get a physical, and the doctor? Oh, the doctor is a whole character. This dude starts rambling about how people go nuts in Africa, and he even measures Marlow's skull. Yep, full phrenology vibes. Marlow's sitting there like, what does my skull size have to do with piloting a boat? But whatever, he gets cleared and hops on a boat to Africa. The trip there is no cruise vacation, let me tell you. Marlow arrives at the coast and immediately sees the mess colonization has made. Picture this, rundown buildings, random explosions, and people looking like they've been working nonstop for years with zero pay or food. The vibe is dystopian AF. Marlow's like, yikes, this is worse than I thought. And the worst part? Nobody seems to care. The Europeans in charge are acting like this is all normal, and Marlow's just standing there like, am I the only one seeing this? Eventually, Marlow makes his way to the company's central station, where his steamboat is supposed to be waiting for him. But guess what? The boat's a wreck. Apparently, someone crashed it, and now Marlow has to fix it before he can go anywhere. He's annoyed, but also like, fine, whatever. I'll just grind out this side quest before moving on. While he's at the station, Marlow meets a bunch of weird characters. There's the manager, who's giving off major mid-boss energy. This guy's all about keeping his power and doesn't actually care about doing his job. He's also super insecure about this other dude named Kurtz, who everyone keeps hyping up like he's some kind of legendary figure. People are out here whispering about how Kurtz is a genius, a poet, a prophet, and maybe even a little insane. Marlow's curious, but also low-key skeptical. He's like, okay, but is this guy actually cool, or are you all just simping for him? Then there's the brickmaker, who's supposed to be making bricks, but isn't, because there's no actual brickmaking material. This guy is basically the company's gossip king, spilling tea about how Kurtz is climbing the corporate ladder and might take over the whole operation. Marlow's like, bro, I just want my boat fixed, but the brickmaker won't stop talking. He's one of those people who loves drama but doesn't actually do anything. Finally, after what feels like forever, Marlow gets the steamboat fixed and is ready to head out. His mission? Go up the river, find Kurtz, and bring him back. Easy, right? Wrong. Because as Marlow gets closer to Kurtz, he realizes that this journey isn't just about finding some guy, it's about confronting the dark side of humanity. And by dark side, I mean the greed, violence, and straight-up madness that comes with unchecked power. So, that's chapter 1 for you. It's a slow burn, but it sets up the vibe for the rest of the story, dark, unsettling, and full of questions about what happens when people lose sight of their humanity. Marlow's heading into uncharted territory, and you can tell things are about to get real messy. Alright, squad, chapter 2 of Heart of Darkness is where the story cranks the tension up to 11. Picture this as the part of a survival horror game where you're deep in the jungle, the eerie music kicks in, and you just know a boss fight is lurking around the corner. Marlow, our boy with the chill but existential vibes, is finally on the move, steering his janky little steamboat up the Congo River, heading straight into chaos. And trust me, it's not just the river that's murky, this whole chapter is like a deep dive into the messiest corners of the human soul. So, Marlow and his crew, which includes a ragtag group of Europeans and some local African workers, most of whom are barely being treated like humans, are checking along the river. The mood? Suspenseful. Marlow's constantly on edge, and you can feel it. He's got this sense that something's not right, not just with the journey, but with the whole vibe of colonization. It's like he's starting to wake up and realize, wait a second, this isn't an epic adventure, this is a total dumpster fire. As the boat winds through the jungle, Marlow gets this creeping sense of isolation. The jungle isn't just a backdrop, it's practically alive, looming over the river like it's got its own personality. Imagine a boss arena in Elden Ring where the environment itself feels like it's taunting you. The river's winding path feels endless, and the further they go, the more Marlow starts to feel like he's leaving the real world behind. He's like, this isn't just geography, it's a descent into the unknown. Oh, and the crew? Let's just say they're not exactly confidence-inspiring. Marlow's main companions include a bunch of clueless Europeans who clearly have no idea what they're doing. They're supposed to be here for ivory, but mostly they're just vibing in their own incompetence. The African workers, meanwhile, are doing all the heavy lifting, literally and figuratively, but they're being treated like expendable background characters in someone else's story. Marlow notices this and starts feeling some major discomfort about the whole setup. It's like he's slowly realizing, yo, this is super messed up. But let's talk about the real star of the chapter, Kurtz. Everyone on the boat is either talking about him, hinting at him, or hyping him up like he's some kind of god-tier influencer. Kurtz is the company's golden boy, a guy who's supposedly gone deep into the jungle and become this legendary figure. Some people describe him as a genius, others make him sound like a full-blown cult leader. Marlow's curious, but also skeptical. He's like, okay, but is this guy a visionary, or is he just another colonizer with delusions of grandeur? As they get closer to Kurtz's station, things get spooky. The jungle seems to close in tighter, and Marlow starts hearing strange noises, drums in the distance, eerie cries, and other sounds that make it clear they're being watched. The tension is real, and the whole crew is feeling it. The Europeans are freaking out, whispering about how the locals are dangerous and unpredictable, but Marlow's like, maybe they're just mad because we showed up uninvited and started ruining everything? At one point, the boat stops so the crew can clear a path through the river, and Marlow takes a moment to reflect. He starts thinking about how small and insignificant humans are compared to the vastness of nature. It's this whole existential crisis moment where he's like, what even is civilization? Is it just a thin layer of fancy clothes and rules that falls apart as soon as things get tough? Marlow's brain is basically spiraling, and you can't really blame him. He's surrounded by greed, violence, and the crushing weight of realizing that the civilized world isn't any better than the chaos of the jungle. Then comes one of the most intense moments of the chapter, the boat gets ambushed. Yep, full-on attack mode. Out of nowhere, arrows and spears start flying from the jungle, and the crew is freaking out. The Europeans, who've been acting all smug and superior this whole time, suddenly lose their nerve. They're firing their guns into the trees, but they can't even see their attackers. It's total chaos. And Marlow? Oh, he's trying to keep it together, but it's not easy. The whole scene is like something out of Call of Duty, except way more terrifying because the stakes feel so raw and real. The African workers on the boat are doing their best to stay calm and keep the boat moving, but one of them gets killed in the crossfire. Marlow's devastated, it's clear he respects these guys way more than the bumbling Europeans, and seeing one of them die hits him hard. During the attack, Marlow's focus shifts to what's really important, the steamboat's whistle. He figures out that blasting the whistle might scare off their attackers, so he leans into it like he's dropping the ultimate power move. And guess what? It works. The attackers retreat, and the boat keeps moving. But the vibe? Absolutely shattered. Marlow's shaken, and the crew is even more paranoid than before. After the attack, Marlow has this weird moment of clarity. He starts thinking about Kurtz again and what kind of person he must be to survive in a place like this. At this point, Kurtz has gone from being a mysterious figure to a full-blown obsession. Marlow's like, is this guy a hero, a villain, or something in between? It's like he's chasing a ghost, and the closer he gets, the more questions he has. Oh, and speaking of Kurtz, Marlow gets his hands on some of Kurtz's old writings, which only add to the mystery. These papers are full of grand, philosophical ideas about bringing civilization to the jungle, but they're also dripping with arrogance and a complete lack of self-awareness. Marlow's like, this dude talks a big game, but is he actually about it, or is he just another guy who thinks he's smarter than everyone else? By the end of the chapter, the boat is closing in on Kurtz's station, and the tension is through the roof. The jungle feels like it's holding its breath, and everyone on board knows they're about to step into something big. Marlow's nervous, but also determined. He's like, I've come this far, I need to see this through, no matter how ugly it gets. And trust me, it's about to get real ugly. So, that's chapter 2 for you. It's a slow burn, but it's packed with suspense, existential dread, and some serious commentary on how people justify terrible things in the name of progress. Marlow's journey up the river is like peeling back the layers of humanity, and what he's finding underneath isn't pretty. He's not just traveling through the jungle, he's diving headfirst into the heart of darkness, and there's no turning back. Alright, buckle up, because Chapter 3 of Heart of Darkness is like the final boss battle of this wild, existential game, and let me tell you, it's intense. The vibes are dark, the stakes are high, and by the end, you're going to be questioning humanity, life, and maybe even your Netflix watch list. This is where Marlow finally meets the infamous Kurtz, and trust me, the dude does not disappoint, though maybe not in the way you'd expect. Spoiler alert, Kurtz is less epic hero and more unhinged cult leader, but let's get into it. So, Marlow and his janky steamboat crew are creeping closer to Kurtz's station, and the atmosphere is thick. The jungle feels alive, like it's watching them, judging them, and maybe plotting their demise. It's giving off big Attack on Titan forest vibes, where you're just waiting for something terrible to pop out. Everyone's on edge, especially after the ambush in Chapter 2, and Marlow's over here having an existential crisis every 5 minutes. He's thinking about how this whole journey has been less about finding Kurtz and more about staring into the abyss of humanity. Deep, right? When they finally roll up to Kurtz's station, things are straight up eerie. Imagine pulling up to what's supposed to be a bustling workplace, and instead, it looks like the setting for a post-apocalyptic horror movie. The station is falling apart, surrounded by a creepy fence, and oh yeah, there are skulls on stakes. Yep, actual human heads just chilling like Halloween decorations, except way less festive. Marlow's like, welp, this is definitely not normal. Turns out, these skulls are a warning, and they scream, don't mess with Kurtz. At this point, you can tell that Kurtz has gone full villain arc, and Marlow's both fascinated and horrified. Then, Marlow meets one of Kurtz's biggest fans, this super weird Russian guy decked out in bright, patched-up clothes, looking like he walked out of a poorly funded cosplay convention. This dude is practically glowing with excitement as he talks about Kurtz, like he's the ultimate stan. He's gushing about how Kurtz is a genius, a poet, a god, blah blah blah. Marlow's like, sure, but also, have you seen the skulls? But the Russian doesn't care, he's drunk the Kurtz Kool-Aid and thinks everything the guy does is amazing, even if it's borderline psychotic. The Russian spills some tea about Kurtz's time in the jungle. Apparently, Kurtz came here with big dreams of bringing civilization and culture to the savages, but instead, he decided, you know what? Let's just go full dictator mode. He's been ruling over the locals like some kind of dark messiah, and they worship him like a god. And Kurtz? He's loving it. The guy's ego is so big it could probably block out the sun. Marlow's listening to all this and thinking, this dude sounds more like a boss battle than a man. Finally, Marlow gets to meet the legend himself. And wow, Kurtz is not what anyone was expecting. Instead of this powerful, commanding presence, Kurtz is basically on death's door, skinny, sick, and barely able to move. He's like the endgame boss you finally reach, only to find out they're running on 1 HP. But even in his pathetic state, Kurtz has this weird, magnetic energy. He's talking in this deep, booming voice, dropping philosophical one-liners like he's auditioning for a TED Talk, and Marlow can't help but be drawn in. Kurtz starts ranting about how he's seen the truth of the universe, the darkness in humanity, and how he's the only one brave enough to embrace it. It's like he's claiming he's unlocked some forbidden cheat codes for life, but instead of making him wise, it's turned him into a monster. Marlow's like, okay, but is this enlightenment or just insanity? It's hard to tell, and that's kind of the point. Kurtz represents this idea that when you strip away society's rules, all that's left is raw, chaotic human nature, and it's not pretty. Meanwhile, the locals are still out here worshipping Kurtz like he's the second coming, and Marlow's getting some major cult leader vibes. The dude has these people completely under his thumb, and it's clear he's been using their loyalty to do some seriously messed up stuff. At one point, Marlow finds out Kurtz's main goal wasn't just to collect ivory, it was to grab all the ivory, no matter the cost. He's been raiding villages, starting wars, and leaving destruction in his wake, all in the name of greed. Marlow's disgusted, but he also can't look away. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Things take a turn when Kurtz tries to convince Marlow to join his twisted little empire. He's like, you get it, don't you? Civilization is a lie. The jungle is freedom. Come to the dark side, bro. Marlow's tempted, because let's be real, Kurtz's confidence is kind of hypnotic, but he knows deep down that this path leads straight to madness. Still, he can't shake the feeling that Kurtz might be onto something, even if it's terrifying. As Kurtz's health deteriorates, Marlow decides it's time to bounce. He's not about to let Kurtz die out here in the jungle, so he and the crew load him onto the steamboat and start heading back down the river. But Kurtz isn't going quietly. He's ranting and raving the whole way, talking about his greatness and how he could have done so much more if he'd had more time. It's clear that, even in his final moments, Kurtz can't let go of his ego. And then comes the moment. Kurtz's last words, the most famous line in the book, are, the horror. The horror. What does it mean? Nobody really knows, but it's deep. Maybe he's talking about the darkness he saw in himself, or the horrors of colonization, or just how messed up life is in general. Whatever it is, it leaves Marlow shook. He realizes that Kurtz's descent into madness isn't just a Kurtz problem, it's something that could happen to anyone if they're pushed far enough. After Kurtz dies, Marlow's left to deal with the fallout. He heads back to Europe, but he's not the same. The whole experience has changed him, and he can't stop thinking about the darkness lurking in humanity. He even goes to see Kurtz's fiancée, who still thinks Kurtz was this great, noble guy. Marlow doesn't have the heart to tell her the truth, so he lies and says Kurtz's last words were her name. It's a bittersweet ending that shows just how much the journey has messed with Marlow's head. So there you have it, Chapter 3, the grand finale. It's a dark, twisted exploration of power, greed, and what happens when people lose their moral compass. Kurtz is both a warning and a mirror, showing us what we could become if we're not careful. By the end, Marlow's learned one thing for sure: the heart of darkness isn't just in the jungle, it's in all of us.